You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 140 of Making Tracks, brought to you by those fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. My name's Mark, I'm one of your co-hosts, and joining me this week is the only man whose timing is a little bit prefect. It's Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, dude. Not too bad. Feet and my legs are a little bit sore. We did another day James Bond location spotting in London, and I think we wandered around and we did about an easy 20k yesterday of walking around. To be fair, it was a beautiful, sunny, warm day, so you can't complain too much. Have you had much in the collection room this week? Have you had any new acquisitions?
You know, the only thing that has turned up that I can think of is the Goldsboro Books version of Brotherhood by Mike Chen. With the beautiful...
Got that as well.
Yeah, you got that as well. Excellent. It's lovely. Obviously, he signed it, and it's got that beautiful blue sort of colorization of the lightsaber on the edge of the pages, which looks lovely. And they send them in that nice plastic slipcase as well, which just always looks so classy. So I had quite a few of those Goldsboro books now. Probably had 4 or 5. And I know that Shadow of the Sith will be coming as well, so there's more to come. But they're really nice. They're a little bit more expensive, obviously, but they package them so well. If you love bubble wrap, they're the perfect company to buy from.
That's exactly what I thought when I opened it, and they must give you almost like a good 2 meters worth of bubble wrap, and if you didn't really care, you could literally just hold one end of it and just let it drop, and it would kind of unroll. It's almost like a toilet roll in that respects, but...
Yeah, try using that.
Yeah, oh God, could you imagine? Basically, one of 1,000 copies. Do you know what number yours is?
Mine's upstairs at the moment, but I think it was about 225, something like that.
Mine's 37.
Wow.
So I must have jumped on that pre-order pretty quick.
You did?
I assume that's how it works. It's just like they do it in order of kind of coming in.
Yeah.
So that's like, wow. Yeah, I'm yet to read the book.
It's a very good book.
That is on my list. Wow, it's on my my Audible library, I think, at the moment.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I had a copy of Cosplayer History by Andrew Liptak. We spoke to Andrew on Canon Fodder.
Oh, nice.
A copy of his book has come through, so that's there on the review pile. So there's 2 books. What about you?
I picked up a Nubian N1 Starfighter. The kind of thing that I know for a damn well sure fact that I brought it back in 1999, but then I know I also sold all my prequel collection.
You had a Jedi purge.
It was a monumental purge because it was pretty much all the prequel figures and vehicles. I mean, and I had pretty much all of them anyway. I picked one up, obviously, after the Mandalorian episode where we kind of get reintroduced to the Nubian. The prices went up a bit, but then they've kind of come down a little bit, and it's just trying to find one in a good kind of condition. So this one is mint and sealed box. The box is pretty good. It's got price tags on it still from a store that I've never heard of, but reassuringly the price tags were for like 29 quid or something, so I didn't actually pay that much more on it. So that's not quite nice, actually, because you know what it's like. You get vintage stuff and it says like $1.99 and $3.99, and you're like, I paid 80 quid for that. So what is in the news this week? What are we going to have a chat about?
I think we should kick off with the man of the moment, Colin Trevorrow. He has just seen the opening of Jurassic World Dominion. Ignore the critics, it was great fun. But of course, he was involved for a while on Star Wars Episode 9. We're told that his version would have been called Duel of the Fates. But Colin did talk about being involved and that basically no regrets. He was very pleased to have been involved. I shall read his quote because it's quite a telling quote. It was complicated, but honestly, I mean, since we're talking about it now in 2022, I can say honestly, I'm very grateful, Kathy Canady, for recognising that she and I were never going to make a movie that we were both proud of together. I think that's very interesting. And she's been doing this for so long, and she cares about me, and I care about her and her family. And Frank Marshall and I are partners still. Of course, Frank Marshall has produced all of the Jurassic films. I'm a part of this group of incredible filmmakers, so it was a complicated moment. But now, having been able to do this and really feel like this is what, I'm glad I did this. You know, it is what it is, I think he's saying. You know, I'm glad that I did it. I'm deeply, deeply satisfied for having done this. I appreciate that she had the wisdom to see something that, honestly, I'm not sure I could have seen because I was so dialed into the story that I wanted to tell. So clearly he was very invested in, and I put the image with the article of Finn and Poe and Chewie and some of the other characters all going to war. We've all read and we've chewed over the Duel of the Fates ideas. It was a lot more adversarial and a lot more warlike, I think, quite full on.
Mm-hmm.
He was dialed into that, as he says. Kathy Kennedy wasn't. What do you make of that? I think that's quite a sensible take.
It's kind of a diplomatic take,
Yeah.
I think, as well, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it doesn't apportion blame to Kathy or to him per se. It, as what was reported at the time, it sounds like creative differences. We did read like the Duel of Fate story, and it went off in different directions, and it was probably tonally a lot darker than maybe Star Wars or that trilogy needed to be at that time. So therefore, you can understand Kathy kind of going, whoa, hang on a sec, let's pull this back a little bit. I would still be fascinated to kind of find out what his ideas were about how to treat and handle the Princess Leia character now that Carrie had passed on. Again, that was one of those things that seemed to be at the centre of the disagreement. Maybe it just came down to he was quite happy to recast, or maybe it was just a way to not have her presence at all in the film and just kind of have her die off screen. So very interesting, and like I said, diplomatic obviously, because like you said, he's still working with Frank, and ultimately the Jurassic Park franchise, this trilogy has come to an end, so he's going to be looking for new and different projects, so he probably doesn't want to burn any Hollywood bridges at this point in time.
Yeah, I looked back through some old notes and he was being mentioned when they were looking and talking about directors for episode 7. Colin Trevorrow's name was coming up then, so he's obviously been in and around all of this. If you consider that Frank is producing Jurassic, Kathleen Kennedy was producer on the earlier ones. She's now doing Star Wars, and ILM's doing both, and John Williams is... There's loads of connections, even down to the production teams and the visual effects teams, obviously. They're probably as connected now as the Indiana Jones franchise was connected to Star Wars back in the original trilogy era.
Yeah.
Lucasfilm were producing both, but one was a Fox film, one was a Paramount. This time, one's a Disney film, one's a Universal. So, there's connections. But nevertheless, it's quite bold and very clear to say that I had a vision and I believed in it, and this is what I wanted to make. And Lucasfilm, and he refers to Kathleen Kennedy, but it's broader than just that. She thought that it needed to go in a different direction. There was different considerations to take on board, different things that they needed to wrap up. So to frame it the way he's put it in a concise paragraph like that, very clear that there's no enmity between the two parties. His Jurassic journey is pretty much done now. Like Spielberg, he may executive produce the next Jurassic trilogy, which hopefully is a few years away. Let it lie fallow for a while now, because I can see this one doing a ton of money. Yeah, he's got to look at his next project, doesn't he? And there's plenty going on in the Star Wars galaxy, and there's certainly plenty going on in the Marvel universe, and there's areas that you could drop into, franchise areas that you could drop into quite smartly.
Just at one point raises a question of whether or not, once you're out from Lucasfilm, i.e. creative differences, does that mean you're always out? Is that it done, so therefore his name's now off the table? Or maybe is it a case like Rian Johnson, whereby if the right project comes along at the right time, they would happily work with him? I suppose it all kind of comes down to the nature of that relationship between him and Kathy. How combative was it? And I suppose if you were to dig a little bit deeper into that one line about, he was obviously focused on his creative story that he wanted to tell, whether or not then that made it very difficult for him to be swung to a different direction. So therefore it's like it's either my story or it's no story. And it'd be interesting to get the scuttlebutt from Lucasfilm employees who were around at the time, just to kind of see what the actual kind of atmosphere was.
If he's got a determined, focused vision, which he clearly did, and felt like this is the story I want to tell, and it's not right for 9, we know people always paint Kathleen Kennedy as the villain, but nevertheless, she has to consider, not only are we trying to do a sequel to The Last Jedi and wrapping up the sequel trilogy, this is wrapping up all 3 trilogies. So there was a lot more moving parts, and you look at his script, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of new stuff introduced, there's a lot of dark stuff, which isn't a bad thing, because goodness knows Kenobi went pretty dark last week, so there's scope and room for all of that. But maybe somewhere down the line, when a project comes along and an idea germinates and somebody says, remember that really full-on dark script that Trevorrow did for 9? Don't you think he might be good for this? They've just brought John Watts in from the Spider-Man franchise to do Skeleton Crew, which is focusing on kids, and they've said ambling 80s vibe, and you look at Homecoming, especially Homecoming, and you think that's very much in that wheelhouse.
Yeah.
They've picked the right guy for the right project there. Hopefully, we haven't seen a frame of it, but hopefully that's what they've done. Maybe if there's something a bit darker, a bit grittier, a bit more adult, I'm waggling the air quotes, a bit more adult, they turn to Trevorrow. If, like you said, with Ryan, scheduling's going to match up. He's a busy fella, so maybe getting him might be off the table now because he's so busy. But maybe if they can line it up and get Trevorrow to do that, the stars might align.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, from what I understand, Rian Johnson has a deal with Netflix now in place to develop, other films. And I think Knives Out, Bats, a single film is now, as is with everything, if it does well, it suddenly becomes a franchise. Yeah. And it's like, he's just finished directing the second one. Will we see a third one or a fourth one? And will his involvement change? Will he still be the auteur director? And is he going to carry on with that? Or is he going to hand it over to somebody else to direct the third and the fourth installment? So that's interesting. I mean, the one thing that I think Lucasfilm seems to do every time they announce a film or a project, and I don't necessarily think it is a good thing, is they seem to compare what they're doing to another film or to another genre of films. When we go back to Star Wars, you can't compare Star Wars to a specific film because it's got such a wide influence. And I just wonder sometimes, like with Skeleton Crew, if everybody then now focuses on the Amblin Goonies kind of vibe a little bit too much, when actually maybe you kind of go, well, this is still Star Wars, and Star Wars needs to pull from all different types of genres, Western and Japanese and war and everything else. And it's how you kind of boil those together and melt them down and create something new. That alchemy. Yeah. That is what we need to focus on, rather than kind of going, right, we now need to put this into a little shoebox and go, right, yeah, this is an homage to like Steven Spielberg and all those kind of E.T. kind of type films and stuff like that.
You've took us on a tangent there, mate, because that's a really good point. No, don't apologise, because it's a quiet news week. When Filoni was doing Clone Wars, you very much got the sense of, this is the Western homage. Yeah. This is the Kaiju episode with the Zillo Beast. So this is his Godzilla homage. This is the this is the that. And it was very much pointing to real world 20th/21st century influences and doing a Star Wars version of it. And to my mind anyway, Star Wars now is so big and has always, like you've just said, always been a massive melting pot of influences that just imbued into Lucas as a kid and splurged out initially as Flash Gordon, then becomes Star Wars. You look at all of those influences in Star Wars, but then Star Wars, when it launches in 77, is its own thing. Thank Gil Taylor for the look of it. Doesn't get enough credit for giving us that look of Star Wars. Macquarie, of course, and the legends of Star Wars, Williams with the music, and all the tentpoles that make Star Wars what it is. I think Star Wars is enough of a beast of its own that Star Wars can now reference Star Wars without going, like you say. And I'm excited because I love the Amblin films of the 80s. That would be great if they can get that vibe. It's almost like cheap marketing, isn't it? Like, we want to give you a sense of what this is about. So we'll say, this one's a bit like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you go into it thinking, this is going to be Raiders of the Lost Ark. And when it isn't Raiders of the Lost Ark, you go, like Solo had a Raiders feel to me because Kasdan's the link, obviously, but it definitely had that feel about it. What do you think about that? The Trek animated series Lower Decks pretty much only refers to other Star Trek stuff and is beautiful for it, because if you get the joke, you get it. And if you don't get the joke, you go, I know that's nodding to something. And it makes you want to go and find out what it's nodding to. What do you think?
That's a really astute kind of way of putting it. Part of this is down to how viewership has changed in the last 40 years. Yeah. We're now more sensitive for looking at this stuff. We do a reaction chat, and that comes out normally the same day as the episode of Kenobi. Yeah. By the afternoon, there's normally at least one, if not two or three, reaction videos. The 45 Easter eggs from Kenobi you may have not spotted. They're already out there, and some of those obviously then allude to the homages and the inspirations for that episode. And so I think as a viewership also, we've become a lot more aware of stuff. As obviously franchises have popped up and have been developed, we kind of all go, oh, well, yeah, that's kind of a little bit more like, I don't know, Harry Potter, or that's a little bit more like Lord of the Rings or whatever. That's just now inherent in conversations that we now have. But Star Wars has got such a big history now that you can make these references. And I don't think it needs to be done in such a tongue-in-cheek or obvious way whereby people would stand up and go, that's like an Easter egg, or that's pandering to the fans or something like that. But actually, I think you could kind of go, one of that is kind of riffing off a little bit of Star Wars. And I think in some respects, we kind of got that with part 4 of Kenobi this week. Obviously, me and you talked about it. I spoke about it with Brian. This is the A New Hope episode of Kenobi. Okay, it was probably a little bit overt in some of its designs, but they started to do that already, I think. And I think, again, it's just going to be obviously how they do it and how they craft it so that it's not quite slapping you hard in the face and that you have to dig a little bit deeper before you can start finding some of these comparisons.
I'm Gareth Edwards, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks Radio.
So we're going to take you to Blackburn, halfway across the galaxy, back to May of 2022, Star Wars Fan Fun Day, where we had the chance to sit down with Captain Canady from The Last Jedi, Mark Lewis-Jones, to talk all about his Star Wars experiences and much, much more. So we're here at Star Wars Fan Fun Day in Blackburn at Ewood Park. I'm looking at the pitch and it looks lovely, and I'm sat here next to Mark Lewis-Jones. How's life?
Oh, very well, thanks very much. Coming to the end of it, and it's been lovely. It's been a really nice, homely one, and it's lovely being next to the pitch with that old stand opposite, which reminds me of football in the 70s. It's lovely.
It's got that about it, hasn't it?
It's got a real lovely feel about it, isn't it? I'm glad they've kept that.
Yeah, and a Premier League winning stadium as well, which is always nice to be at.
Yeah, of course, and they're doing all right now, aren't they? They're doing well in the Championship.
Yeah. So you've enjoyed the show. I mean, how many shows have you done? Have you done many events?
I haven't done many at all, really. But I've enjoyed this one. This one's been really nice. It's been kind of a bit homely and close up and personal.
Yeah.
Which is nice. It's not one of the huge ones. I did the Welsh one a few years back, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that was very nice. That's very near my where I'm from, so that was nice to do. And this one, really, I've not done many more than that. But I've enjoyed this one. It's been lovely being in Blackburn, and it's been nice to kind of, take time to chat to people a bit more. It's been less hectic.
Yeah. Do you enjoy? Obviously, he had a great scene in that opening of Last Jedi. So, do you enjoy the chance to explain the situation, explain what your time on the film, talk about the character to folks, especially I think to kids, because it's a family fun day. It's that kind of show.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's it's nice to go back and remember. It wasn't very long. I was only on it for a few days. They got me back a couple of times to do some extra shots. But I had a lovely time, and I think the last time you and I spoke about Rian Johnson and how lovely he was to work with, and when I came onto the film, it was already well into the shoot, but everyone was saying how much they were enjoying working with Rian, and what a lovely presence he had, and he knew everybody's names, and he was lovely to everyone, and he was in total control of the film, and the whole of Pinewood was being used. They were using every stage for Last Jedi, and he was in total control without being, dictatorial.
Gotcha.
Yeah, lovely man.
As an actor who works on a lot of stuff and working actor, so you're moving around, to have a director who's that on top of it, and that, like you say, he knows everyone's names, that must be a joy to be in a set like that. Is that a fairly rare thing?
I think there are people like Rian about, and the thing I liked about Rian more than anything was that when we got to doing the scene, it was like we could have been working on a low-budget film in the, there was the same process.
Okay.
So the sharp end remained the same.
Yeah.
And we discussed the scene, and then I did it a couple of times, and he gave me some lovely notes, and so it take away all of the huge paraphernalia of Star Wars. The pointy end was the same.
Yeah. And do you enjoy it? I mean, like you say, you got all the whistles and bells. You're on a starship. You're the commander of a starship. That's the outward-facing part of it. But internally, as an actor, you still got to convey what this guy's thinking. Is that what you whittle it down to as an actor, just to the moment?
I think so. And something like this scene, you had to kind of try and. In a short space of time with not many lines, give this guy kind of, some level of characterization and backstory, and hopefully that happened, it was kind of like a little opportunity to kind of give a little snapshot into Captain Canady's mind, I guess, and his mindset, and how he felt about, other officers, and he was sort of really peed off that none of them were up to scratch. It was a nice scene, and it had a lot of stuff going on under the surface.
I think when we spoke before, we said that he very much felt like the Ken Colley kind of character in the original trilogy. Almost felt like a working class guy who'd worked his way up the ranks.
That's right.
Had that
command of him.
Yeah, there was a sort of old-fashioned military feel about him that he came, as you say, he'd come through the ranks. He wasn't taking any nonsense. He couldn't bear the thought of these young officers having no experience and thinking they were above him. You know, he had that kind of feel about him, sort of old-fashioned military.
Yeah.
Yeah, which made him, really kind of opened up the character, didn't it, in a short space of time,
Yeah. It's a shame we never had a chance to explore him more. It would have been fun to see a bit more from him.
I would have loved that.
So, being in Star Wars, obviously, an offshoot of that is events like this, the opportunity to go to conventions and meet folks, something that you don't tend to get with other franchises or other TV shows. Is that a bonus for you? Is that something you maybe didn't expect but are enjoying the fruits of, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I do enjoy them. I don't, as I say, I don't do a great deal, but this one...
You're a busy actor, that's right.
I am, yeah, thankfully and luckily.
Yeah.
But this one came up and it just appealed to me, that it was charity-based.
Yeah.
There's a great charity that the profits are going to, and the hospice here in Blackburn. So, it kind of just felt like a nice one to do, and it's proved to be that. I've enjoyed it very much.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for your time.
Thanks again.
One of my favourite characters in Last Jedi is Captain Canady.
Yep.
I think that's partly down to obviously how he's been written in the book as well.
Yeah.
And you get a little bit more insight into his persona. And I think that character needs to have a bigger part somewhere in Star Wars, somewhere else, because I thought he was awesome.
Yeah, he had that vibe of an old Imperial officer from back in the day, which I think his character bled over from the Empire into the First Order. That makes all the sense.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
One of the many aspects of reviewing a Star Wars series, or indeed any series, before it's completed, is that you haven't got the full story. And fans like us have been hypothesising, pontificating, digging into episodes of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and like many others have noticed that there are some, waggling the air quotes, gaps in the narrative. That's because we're only 2/3 of the way through the show, and there's 2 episodes to go yet. Joby Harold, one of the writers on the show, has discussed this with Entertainment Weekly and mentions some of these, what fans are calling plot holes, and does say, and we're looking forward to the show airing in its entirety so that hopefully all questions are answered fully. So it's tricky to field some of those questions mid-process, but yes, all I can say is we're very cognizant of that and of Canon, and it's a massive team at Lucasfilm, so we're all very aware of the choices that are being made. He goes on to say, just that one of the challenges with the show is we know where it begins and we know where it ends. And part of the fun of it was, in the journey in between, taking us to places maybe you wouldn't expect and some surprises along the way. But hopefully there's a satisfaction to landing the plane back where we all imagine it'll end up. I like that. Vis-a-vis Episode 4 and A New Hope. So there's some emotional stuff ahead. There's more surprises ahead. And hopefully when everything is concluded, we'll be able to look at the whole thing as a complete story. And some of the earlier choices will make sense. So I'm just excited for all to get out there. And finally, it will be so much easier to speak to these things once we've aired everything. But as I said before, we very much take Canon very, very seriously. And there are many, many people behind the scenes who prioritise that. So we have it in mind. And by the time everything is concluded, all things should be in place. Long quote. What do you make of that? It makes all the sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely. 100%. So it kind of sounds like Joby has passed the buck and kind of said, if it doesn't make sense, blame Pablo. He's got the credit for Lore Master on the series. So, but no, I mean, completely correct. And it's frustrating because ultimately, on one hand, he's taken a big swing and he's kind of said, look, you just got to stick with it and it will all make sense in the end. We know as Star Wars fans that sometimes when you start getting a little bee in your bonnet, and there's something that is niggling you, when it does get resolved, people still aren't satisfied.
Yes.
And that's the thing, there's some stuff that can be easily explained away. Therefore, I don't necessarily think you need to have a clever way of doing it. If he just says to Leia, I want you to basically just forget that we've ever met, that's what she does and we move on. It doesn't need to be kind of clever. And I don't necessarily think that now, with Star Wars, and the fact that we've had such an abundance of content, that we need to get so het up and so nervous about Star Wars in the same way. It's not like even really when we had The Force Awakens where, oh my God, this is Force Awakens, this is new Star Wars. Oh my God, we've got to analyze this and we've got to put everything into boxes and make sure it all lines up and stuff like that. Star Wars is constantly evolving, and there's one line that Vader says in A New Hope whereby he kind of says, there's a presence here I've not felt since, ... and it trails off. Now, before Kenobi, we can fill in that blanks and say, since Mustafar. But now, because of Kenobi, and currently, because after episode 3, we can say, well, it's a presence he's not felt since Mapuzo. And so they've changed that, they've altered it. It has absolutely no effect on the line itself in the film. It's just now, obviously, we've got a new perspective. That's fine. I'm happy with that. People just maybe need to slightly relax a little bit. Maybe I need to relax a little bit as I'm ranting, but we've got to let these things play out. But at the end of the day, when the show has still got 2 episodes to air, do they think Kathleen Kennedy's going to suddenly run into like an edit suite and go, right, we've now got to go back and we've got to make sure that episode 5 and episode 6 completely lines up because the fans demand it? They've probably done that, and we just have to have a little bit of faith now and again.
Yeah, totally. And we've said this before on the show. I think headcanon is the biggest enemy of any of this, because clearly Joby's saying here, we're very cognizant of the canon. It's a big team at Lucasfilm, he's alluding to the story group. So there's a lot of people putting their 2p worth in towards making this all work, which is as it should be, as you would expect, especially for Star Wars, where canon is a massive consideration. And some people are like, screw canon, it doesn't matter. And others are like, we respect the canon. I'm of the camp of, please respect the canon. Don't be a slave to the canon, because there's always a retcon. I think retcons really started with Star Wars, to my mind anyway. So making that work is very important. But like you say, the show's not finished yet. The story's not finished yet. And it is a lot of what we think we know is exactly that. It's what we think we know. We've made very broad phraseology and very broad lines said by characters. We've made them immutable. And I'm saying we as the royal we, I mean the fandom. And even then, it's only elements of the fandom. I can see, just like you said, since 2005, we've thought, the last time they met was that big clash over the lava pit at Mustafar. Now we know it wasn't. It was that quarry on Mapuzo where Vader completely took Obi-Wan to bits. That was the last time they met. As we speak now on episode 140 of Making Tracks, as far as we know, that was the last time they met. If we get another clash in the next 2 episodes, then that'll be the last time they met. If the series is such a hit and it all works to the degree that they want to do this again, and I don't know, it's set 3 years on, so you're 7 years before Star Wars, which is still a significant amount of time, and they clash again, then that will be the last time they met. They never nailed it down. It wasn't like A New Hope said, it's been a long time, Obi-Wan, since we fought over that lava pit on Mustafar. The original film is so beautifully vague. I think there's too much detail sometimes in Star Wars storytelling, in novels and such. But then by the same token, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, if you're going to refer to anything, refer to Star Wars. Let's not make this story about our Western or our romance or our whatever. Let's make it uniquely Star Wars. So yes, reference other stuff, it's fine. But the original film, it's very much of its own style anyway. You know, Empire's very different to Star Wars. Jedi's very different to Empire. But you think of those 3 as one unit. There's enough vagueness in there to make it all work. So he's only speaking very logical points here. The show's not finished yet. And maybe we do get a season 2. Fingers crossed we do.
You know, that's the thing, isn't it? There's the beauty of the original trilogy and A New Hope, especially, whereby everything is so vague, and that vagueness isn't because Lucas, in his infinite wisdom, is thinking, in 40 plus years' time, there's going to be a series about Kenobi and how he was dragged off of Tatooine to go and rescue Princess Leia, who is also Luke's sister, by the way. I haven't told you that in A New Hope, but that's going to kind of be added later on. A retcon needs to be like the last resort, i.e. you do a retcon because there's no other possible way you could get around a writing problem.
Yeah.
You do a retcon and there's 4 or 5 different other options, well, then it's an easy way out and it's an easy, sloppy, lazy writing. But if there's no other way around it, and I still think there's ways around the fact that you can kind of explain why Leia addresses General Kenobi in her message. And I think there's other ways why you can explain that Ben Kenobi, when Luke kind of says, I'm here with Ben Kenobi, exclamation, isn't because, you know, of anything else other than the fact, you know, it's surprised that he's actually there. Yeah. And she remembers what's happened, and now we know what's happened. I mean, there is a risk, isn't there? I think Star Wars at the moment is focusing very heavily on 2 points of time. It's that post-Return of the Jedi era where there's a big chunk of time where nothing is happening between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. That's the closest thing we've really got to Blue Sky storytelling at the moment. And then the other stuff, the post-Clone Wars pre-OT era, which it seems to be filling up very quickly with Bad Batch and Andor and Kenobi and Solo and Rogue One. There's still a lot of time in those timelines, but with each series comes the inherent risk that you are going to trip over. And the problem is there's still people in Lucasfilm going to forget that actually maybe something that was referred to in the Bad Batch is different to what happened in Andor, for example. Unless they suddenly build some kind of canon database machine whereby you tap in the parameters and then it kind of comes out saying, no, this is perfectly fine, or no, this is a retcon. Some of this stuff is always going to happen. And then, like we kind of said also with Colin Trevorrow, you've got to also take into consideration they pay a big chunk of money to attract these directors and these creatives, and they will also want their own story and want to tell things in a certain way. And the moment we start being too slavish to the canon, we then can sometimes, at some respects, tie their hands a little bit too much, and we could potentially miss out on a beautiful moment or a different story beat and a different perspective than what we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, that's very true. You make a lot of really interesting points there, but also because it is somebody else's sandbox, and even though Disney bought it, it's always going to be George's sandbox to most people. Certainly of these generations, as we move in further and further out from the sale, which is 10 years this year, then that will become less and less the case, of course. What you say is so true, that we are very deep in that mid-trilogy minefield of potential explosions that can trip people up. It's got to be balanced between the story group. I'm saying them as an example. There's a lot more than just those guys, but the story group knowing exactly where they can and cannot go, and the writers being happy to work within that. But you mentioned some beautiful story points and carrots of things and so on and so forth. Once you get beyond the sequel trilogy, when it really is Blue Sky, because the only thing that's gone past that is Legacy series, which is not canon anymore anyway, but they can pull from it if they want to. I think once you get out there, then you can hit as many beats and elements and things as you want to hit. I think what they'll always want is another moment like, no, I am your father, or Leia is my sister. These big reveals that you take for granted now, but in the moment it was like, what?
Well,
and there weren't really any in Star Wars because there was nothing to refer back to, if that makes sense. But in Empire there was, and in Jedi there was. Prequels are different because that's your Silmarillion, isn't it? It's like you're filling in the history of the OT with all the stuff that happens in the prequel trilogy and the promise of what we were going to see back when you read the first pages of the novel was talking about the Clone Wars and how it kind of happened. The very first thing you ever read of Star Wars, if the book was the first thing you read, it was the Clone Wars, not the OT. But once you get out of that mid-trilogy PT, OT area, the freer you'll be. I think when you're in that area, you've got to respect the canon because, like you say, a lot of fans are way more granular than us. You and me have got a fairly broad view on a lot of stuff and obviously have a good bit of knowledge. But there's people out there that pick up on things like that. And so those people who are just as valid a part of the fandom as the kid who's literally 5 minutes ago picked up his first Grogu plush toy in a shop and gone, I love this. We're all fans together. You've got to cater to everyone. So I think it is a very tricky balance.
Hello, I'm Dennis Lawson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Okay, we have a listener's question, and it's a bit of a cracker, I think, and this will get us all thinking. It's from Dan Lowe. Dan is a contributor to Fantha Tracks. He helps write our reviews of the episodes every week, but I put the question out there. Can we have some questions for the show today? We had a few come in. I'm going to hold a couple back for next week. My question is, the Star Wars version of, is a hot dog a sandwich? Is the Death Star a vehicle? Mark Mulcaster, Commanding Officer of the Rebel Legion UK, what is your answer to this question?
Is a Jaffa cake a cake? Very good question.
Is a fascinator a hat?
Exactly. I'm going to be kind of a little bit logical about this, okay? The thing is, we automatically assume because of that one famous and beautiful line from A New Hope, that's no moon, that's a space station, but actually the Death Star is a space station. Now, we know from looking at the technical manuals and all the other kind of ancillary material that's come out that the Death Star does have hyperdrives. So therefore, has got the ability to move from a certain place to another certain place. Thinking about it, a space station, from what my limited understanding of aeronautical definitions is basically an artificial installation that orbits a planet or another celestial body. So the Death Star has a capability of doing that, but I'm going to give you an alternative to whether or not it's a space station or a ship and actually say, is the Death Star simply a weapon. And the reason why I say that is everything that is in the Death Star is there as a function of that weapon, i.e. the weapon needs to be able to destroy planets, so therefore it needs to move. It needs to have a certain amount of troops there to operate said weapon, and it also needs obviously the power to be able to fire the super laser. So I think the Death Star is neither a space station or a vehicle. I just think it's a weapon.
I see the logic of that. If you read Darksaber, when they built you had the super laser sort of flying around as its own thing, wasn't it?
It was like basically if you were to strip out everything that is a Death Star and just boil it down to the super laser, it was meant to basically look like a lightsaber. Wasn't
It did look like a lightsaber,
yeah. That's how Kevin J. Anderson, I think, envisioned it, which makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, that line you mentioned from A New Hope, that's no moon, that's a space station. Han Solo, straight away, too big to be a space station. So straight away, the guy with the most galactic experience of flying around has negated the thought that it's a space station. Give Solo some credit. He's not trying to be a smart guy in that moment. It's a quick observation. The Death Star is a battle station, isn't it? Because it's a battle station, because we know it's got hyperdrive. We saw in Jedi specifically, in Star Wars, it blows up a planet and then it tries to blow up another planet or a moon. In Return of the Jedi, you see it take out a Rebel cruiser, quite mobile, takes out the cruiser, and then tries to take out Endor. That's the plan, obviously, doesn't. But when you see Rogue One, with visual effects moving on as they have, you really do see how mobile the Death Star is. You see it turn up over Jeddah. At the end, you see it arrive at Scarif. But nevertheless, it feels more mobile in that moment. So I would say, I don't know whether Dan, I need to throw the question back at Dan and say, is a hot dog a sandwich? Like you say, is Jaffa Cake a cake? I think it's a vehicle because you travel on it. It's like a RV, isn't it? You can park it up, you can live in it. You can up sticks and drive off. You can't blow up a planet with it, but you can travel in it. So I think the Death Star there's a vehicular, I wouldn't want to park it, but there's a vehicular element to it. In A New Hope, the Death Star has cleared the planet. You're thinking, why don't they just drop the Death Star out of hyperspace in the right place to blow it up? But they don't, because where's the drama? Where's the peril of taking the Death Star out before they blow up Yavin 4? I get that from a dramatic point of view, but nevertheless, it moves. So in my mind, the Death Star is a vehicle. In your mind, the Death Star is a weapon.
That's pretty much what I'm going with and stick with that. But there's one actually thing I've always wondered about. Is like, how long is the Death Star actually in the Alderaan system for? Did it arrive literally just 10 minutes before they dragged Princess Leia in front of Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader, or is it been sat there for a little while?
But one of the Dark Horse Star Wars manga comics, and it was beautiful. You saw the Death Star, and you saw a fleet of Star Destroyers ahead of it, and you saw the streaks of hyperspace behind it. One of the things you never really got to see was, or really given much thought to, is if you're on the Death Star near a window to the exterior portion of the Death Star, and you're flying through hyperspace, you look out the window, you're going to see the streaks of hyperspace like we do when we look out the Falcon's window. But we've never really seen that. That's a great point about Alderaan. How quick did they get there? Because looking at the map, which I know you have as your home screen, if you look at the map, Dantooine's sort of to the top, sort of near the centre to the top of the map. And Alderaan is right near the core worlds. It's going down sort of southwest, I think, as you go down. The whole point of Tarkin saying, Dantooine's too remote to make an effective example. Alderaan is right in the middle of those. Ketan and Mordi is not that far away, and there's a whole slew of planets that are prominent planets. Like Tarkin again says in Rogue One, Krennic clearly wants to blow Jeddah up, and Tarkin's like, no, we want to make a statement on a manifesto. Well, when you get to A New Hope, it's, no, this is the time to make the manifesto. This is us stamping our foot down on the galaxy. So I think the Death Star being that mobile, how long had it sat in the Alderaan system? Because if that turned up in the Alderaan system and you're working as a spaceport master or whatever, and you suddenly go, hang on, something just turned up, something huge has just turned up on our screens here. What the heck is that? And you see a mobile battle station has just turned up in orbit. So you wonder how many people would have got off Alderaan before they blew the thing to bits.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because I suppose when you think about it now, and again, it almost comes back to what we're talking about, how things are starting to line up from a story point of view. The manifesto was Alderaan, as you said, but they had only just lost the battle at Scarif.
Yeah.
I'd say they lost. Well, they kind of didn't. They kind of won at Scarif, but they took heavy losses because of what the rebellion did manage to kind of steal. So in some respects, the rebellion objectives were achieved. So then it hops from Scarif to Alderaan. But then you see it, there's shots on Scarif when Krennic's looking up and you can see the Death Star. You know what it's like when the moon's out during the day and everybody, takes photos and goes, it's a Death Star. If you actually saw a Death Star hanging up in the blue sky, if you had the capability, or you knew somebody who had a ship or like some kind of spacefaring vessel, you'd be on that thing like a shot.
Yeah.
Irrespective if you think they're going to fire or not. You'd just be like, yes, I'm out of here.
So the long answer to a short question from Dan Lowe is the Death Star is a vehicle and a weapon.
Or it could be like a tank, because basically a tank is massive cannon on wheels, isn't it? Basically an intergalactic tank.
It's a tank.
And I think on that note, that is about time for us to head out. So thank you very much for sending in that question, Dan. Mark, can you let people know how they can get in touch if they want to send any other questions or comments about anything we talked about?
If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com, as people have done today. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on Facebook and YouTube. We've had a few extra episodes whilst Kenobi's on, so do check out episodes that are landing in the week as well. And check out Fantha Tracks Radio Fridays, 7 o'clock UK time, for new episodes of The Fantha from Down Under, Planet Layer, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, and Cannon Fodder. And that's me done for this episode.
Thank you for that, my friend. I guess I will catch up with you on Wednesday when we can start to pick apart the penultimate part of Kenobi.
Yes, looking forward to that.
Part 5. Looking forward to that. And of course, until then, everybody else, you stay safe, take care, make sure you buy lots of Star Wars, and of course, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Desert Planet Discs.